mean, depresso is something around that's one that's pretty popular too. But yeah, I mean, whatever you can afford to get, absolutely. I mean, they're great.
Yeah. I know we have an electric drill, but I don't even do canning. I don't think
There's an electric canner now. An electric pressure, like Instapot.
it's kind of like an Instapot, correct?
But there is an electric canner, but it does significantly smaller. And again, you're running electricity, so like, what would you use? So yeah. So I'm gonna grab these. Yes.
It's kind of like we're going back in time.
Absolutely. You know, what's amazing is that we have gotten so lazy and spoiled that all of these skills have been put off because we know better, because we have the modern conveniences. I wish that we did not give up that, thinking we were so much advanced, and we miss out on all of the stuff because this is absolutely important.
Would you go ahead and announce that this is session 2 starting on canning and water glass, please?
Okay, so we're going to start session 2, which is on our water glassing, eggs, and canning. Now, disclaimer, I am not an expert. I have only been doing this for like a little over a year. So if you've been canning, you've probably been doing it longer than me. Some of you probably had the opportunity to watch grandma or mom or somebody in the kitchen doing some of this. I am a newbie on all this. So that is my disclaimer. Now, we're going to start with water glassing eggs because this is really short and sweet. And water glassing eggs, I did not bring any. And the reason I did not bring any is because if I move them, they are eggs, they will crack, and I do not want to ruin my eggs. So here's the deal. Water glassing eggs, we were just talking during the break about how all of it's like we're going back in time, that this is skills that we have to go back and learn because we don't do them now because we have all of the modern conveniences. So water glassing eggs seems totally weird and foreign to us, but it was something that was done for a really long time. Water glassing eggs was a way of preserving eggs when you had an abundance during the summer because chickens don't like to work as hard in the winter. I get it. I don't like the cold either. So like chickens were not giving as many eggs during the winter, so they would have a ton during the summer. It's like, what do I do with all of these eggs? They would preserve them. Well, how do you preserve eggs to last until the next season? So it's a term called water glassing eggs. Now, there's a couple different ways to do it. Some people, there's a way of doing it with mineral oil where they coat the egg. I'm going to be talking about a different way. Eggs it's called the bloom. It's a covering that is on the eggs. You don't really see it. It's a protective covering that is on fresh eggs, and that protects the egg. Now, when you go to the store and you buy eggs from the store, the bloom has been taken off. They have been scrubbed, they have been disinfected, they have been sanitized. Even the farm fresh eggs have all had the bloom taken off of it, which shortens the shelf life. Now, when you buy an egg at the store, you get those eggs and they're good for what, like 2 weeks maybe? Those eggs have been sitting somewhere else for a significantly longer period of time. Farm fresh eggs with the bloom still on will last 3 or 4 months. So don't be fooled thinking you're getting fresh eggs. If it did not come from the chicken itself, it's not so fresh. So water glassing eggs is you take clean, like completely clean, farm fresh eggs, like from the chicken, not from a store. You cannot do this with store-bought eggs. You need to befriend a farmer who has chickens who will sell you clean. Now, if they are good and it's not super muddy season and they keep their coops clean, they shouldn't have mud and poop on them. Okay? They cannot have mud, and they cannot have poop, and they can't have anything that you can't take like your t-shirt and just brush off. Okay? Clean, fresh. I think it has to be like less than 5 days. Like the fresher the egg, the better, but they cannot be old eggs. And unrefrigerated. Unrefrigerated. They cannot, because the refrigeration creates condensation, which affects the bloom. So clean, unrefrigerated, unwashed eggs. You take those, and you can use half-gallon or gallon glass jars. Now, some people will say you can do it in buckets as well, and you can. The only thing is, you probably don't want more than a 2-gallon bucket, because when you're filling it up with stuff, the weight, you don't want so many eggs. Like I could fill a 5-gallon bucket with eggs, but the eggs on the bottom are going to be more susceptible to breaking, and we don't want our eggs to break. Okay? So I got my eggs, they're clean, they're unwashed, they're unrefrigerated, and I've inspected to make sure there's no cracks or anything on the eggs. I put them in my, actually before I put them in there, you can either put them in and put the mixture on top of it, but what I do is you mix, this is by weight, okay? So you need a kitchen scale. Again, cheap on Amazon, I think they're like $9. You need a scale, and it's 1 weighed ounce of pickling lime. Now, it doesn't pickle. We're not pickling. Like you can pickle eggs, but they taste different. The egg tastes like a pickle. This isn't the same thing. It's called pickling lime. It comes in a bag. It says pickling lime. You get it in the canning section at whatever store you would like to get it at. And it's pickling. So it's 1 ounce of pickling lime to 1 quart of water. Yes, I was going to say. So you can, if you use City Tap, I think you have to let it sit out for like 24 hours to get all the chlorine and stuff out of it. I use distilled water. So 1 ounce of pickling lime to 1 quart of distilled water. Just room temperature. I don't want super cold water, right? I don't want refrigerated water. I just buy a gallon of distilled water. So I normally mix mine in, I weighed my pickling lime. I normally put it in a quart jar, and I mix it up, and it looks milky. Okay, it'll look milky when you mix it up. I will say, pickling lime, do not inhale it. It is not pleasant. It burns your lungs. So don't inhale the pickling lime, and it's powdery. So it is like kind of like powdered sugar, goes up. Be careful with that. So pickling lime, and some people wear gloves with it. I don't, but it really does dry your skin out. So what I do is I mix up my thing. If I have a gallon, and we can put in there, I buy a 4-pack of gallon jars on Amazon. Okay, and we'll check. And I sent Larry a link yesterday. I think they were $35. I think they're $35 for a 4-pack. Some of the prices have gone up, but a gallon makes sure you can do half-gallon. You can do anything. I do have a couple old pickle jars. I got the Famous Dave spicy and sweet pickles from Costco. I washed that out, and I have a couple of those jars even. It just really needs to be a jar. The thing with a jar versus a bucket is I can see the eggs in the jar. So I can make sure that they're good and they're not cloudy and nothing's cracked. If I have it in a bucket, I can't really see it. So I prefer a glass jar. So what I do is I have my eggs. They're all good. I have my mixture. Once I get my mixture, I do a gallon, and so I normally mix up 2 quarts to start with, because again, when you put the eggs in there, the water rises, the whole volume density thing. So I mix up my stuff, I pour it into my big gallon jar, and then I take my eggs and I start carefully putting them in there. Ideally, you want to put them pointy side down, but eggs can kind of move. But I try to start them all pointy side down and I can get about 40 eggs in a gallon jar. So I have my eggs, and then I put them in there, and then I just add my mixture of 1 weighed ounce of pickling lime to 1 quart of water. I have it mixed, and I just add it so that the top of it, I don't have any eggs above the water line. I want to have all the eggs fully submerged. Now, with that, you will notice as the pickling lime will settle and you'll get this big white layer of powder at the bottom. That's okay. It doesn't have to keep mixing it up. Don't twist your jars. The first time I did it, I kind of thought, maybe I'll just gently twist my jars every few days just to kind of mix up that pickling lime. I had an egg crack. And so what happened is my water got murky, and I noticed it after a couple days, and so I was able to take out the cracked egg, remove all the eggs, make a clean mixture, and how to redo it. But I don't want my eggs to break, so that's why I didn't bring it, because once you get your jar, you want to carefully walk like it's a bomb. Carefully put it somewhere that on a shelf, in a closet, someplace that's not going to get bumped around a whole lot, and then leave it. They say that if they have been taken care of properly, that they can last up to 2 years. So we are going to do a little experiment with ours. I'm letting mine get 6 months old, which is plenty of time outside of that window. Now here's the thing. So when my eggs are good or have been on the shelf and I am ready to use them, you use them like regular eggs, except you cannot hard boil them. So you can use them for frying, you can use them for scrambling, you can use them for baking. Over time, the yolk might get a little bit runnier. You know, like if you crack an egg, it may be more likely that your yolk is going to crack. They are safe. But you're going to want to rinse off the pickling lime, and you also are going to kind of want to test your egg. So my plan is when I use my eggs, I will have a bowl of clean water that I will rinse them in, but I will also do the sink float test. Eggs, if they are bad, float. Eggs that are good, sink. Okay, if they start to rise up a little bit, that just lets you know that there's a little age, but if they're floating, you're not using. Okay, so when I go to use my eggs, I will take them out, I will put them in a bowl, which will rinse off the pickling lime, and I will see if they sink or float. Another tip that I have heard is that you want to crack each egg into a bowl individually to use it, just in case something happened and that egg wasn't good. You would smell it, and you don't want to have 6 eggs that you were planning on using, and you put the 6th egg in there, and that was the bad one. Now you've wasted all of your eggs. So I'll put it into a bowl, check, sink, float, rinse it off, and individually crack it into a bowl before I mix it into whatever else, just to make sure that those eggs have stayed good. It seems so crazy to us that we would have eggs that can sit on a counter for so long. But we are one of the very, very few countries that even refrigerates our eggs. Most countries have eggs that sit on the counter. That's normal, okay? So we've been trained to think a certain way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the right way. So water glassing eggs, I believe we have a link in our Google Documents. It's under the homesteading family, which is an amazing family. I would love for them to adopt me and to live on their farm. And they do all the amazing things. They do the canning, and they have massive gardens and animals and all this stuff. But she has a video on water glassing eggs. And again, it is easy to do, but you have to have a farm fresh egg, clean, unwashed, unrefrigerated. So find yourself a farmer, find yourself somebody with eggs. I have a lady who I can recommend for a couple people. She cannot support mass quantities. She is in Elkhorn, and she is amazing. And I did ask her if I could give her name to a couple people. And I go and buy 10 dozen eggs at a time from her because you need to tell her, whoever you're buying eggs from, tell them what you're doing and why you need them. They have to make sure, because technically they're not supposed to sell eggs that haven't been washed and refrigerated. So you need to make sure that they know what you're using it for, and that they are not secretly washing and refrigerating those eggs to make sure that they're safe for your purposes. Otherwise, you're going to get eggs that are not, you're going to think they're good, and you go to get them and they're not good, and they taste like pickles. Taste like the lime. So anybody have any questions on that? Jan?
I thought I saw on one of those videos that you could prick the eggs and then hard boil them.
I've seen that too, but the water glassing I've heard 2 different discrepancies on. So when it comes to boiling, like hard boiling eggs, I don't know that I'm going to do that. I mean, if you can prick, because farm fresh eggs, they have to be 2 weeks old, and then you can prick and do that. But for water glassing, the hard boiled eggs, I've seen 2 different stories on that one. So
Sorry if I missed this, but how many, do you need to do it same day that you get the farm fresh, or how long can you wait before you have to water glass?
So how long after you get the farm fresh eggs do you water glass them? So it depends how fresh they are. So I think one of the things I said, you want them less than 5 days old. So, but here's the other thing. Let's say I get a gallon jar, and let's say I only have 1 dozen eggs to water glass. So I can put those eggs in there and have my mixture, and then when I get more eggs, I can carefully add those eggs to it and add more mixture. You can totally do that too. I just put the dates on there. Obviously, the oldest are going to be at the bottom, and that's okay. You just kind of put the dates on there, and I date my eggs so I know when I put them in the water glass. Sue?
This is probably a no-brainer, but you're putting the lid on the jar after.
Yeah, so I am putting the lid on the jar because I don't want it to evaporate. It's not that it's preserving them, it's just keeping them from them evaporating, and then keeping an eye on it. If I ever see that the water has evaporated and the line has gone down, I would just add more mixture to it. Yes, sir?
I heard that you can use construction line.
Yeah, so there is the technical, word for it. It's not just pickling line. There is, and you can buy it in the masonry department, but you're buying a 50-pound bag of it at a time. And for most of us, we would have a hard time storing that, and we would never go through all that. Honestly, I got the little bag of pickling lime from the store, and it was, I don't know, $6 or $7. And I think I have probably maybe 10 gallons. I have 10-gallon jars, and I've only gone through a bag and a half of that. So yes, you can buy it in the hardware section, but you have to store it, and you would have it for everyone forever. Yes. Did you have a question? Oh, do you
How many eggs did you say? You said how many at a time you do? You said
So I've been buying 10 dozen at a time, but not all of those have been clean enough to be able to do. Sometimes there's some stuff on it, so we eat a lot of eggs in our house, and so the eggs that aren't quite clean enough to be able to use for that, then we just use for us. And then the eggs that are clean enough, we do for that. But you can just do a dozen at a time. You do not have to buy mass quantities. Whatever you are comfortable with, whatever your egg dealer can provide you for, or however many you want to buy at a time, is totally fine. We're trying to figure out, can we get chickens and where would we put them and will my dogs eat them and all of that. I would love to have chickens, but again, this is an option because they're not producing so much during the winter, and we do eat lots of eggs. So my goal is to have, again, another protein source. Any other questions? All right, if you think of anything, let me know. It sounds complicated, and it is super simple, and if you watch a couple of videos online, you're going to be like, oh, I got that. The hardest part of all of this is finding your egg dealer. Find your egg dealer, and the rest of it is easy. And you can get, a lot of stores have the half-gallon mason jars, the big ball half-gallons. Those are good too if you don't want a big gallon size. Those are much easier to get, the half-gallon sizes. You cannot can. We'll talk about that in a minute. You can't can in the half-gallon sizes, so I only use those for storage items, but that is another option. I'm trying to think where... The big ones are you definitely have the wide mouth, but all right, so we're gonna move on to canning now. This is gonna be a super quick overview of canning because we don't have a kitchen to be able to show, and we don't really have 3 hours to sit and hang out with each other. So canning is super intimidating at first. I have heard lots of stories of people who had grandmas who had canners or moms who had canners that exploded or that were dangerous. I will say that they've put a lot of new safety features on the canners now. They're a lot safer than they used to be. So let's talk real quick on some canning equipment. So this is a 23-quart Presto canner. There is the All-American. That is the Cadillac Mac Daddies of canners. That is awesome. It holds the most. It is also, again, the most expensive. It is a phenomenal canner. So if you can get that, awesome. When we were starting this journey of everything, we were kind of prioritizing. And so I wanted a canner, but I wanted the Berkey. And so we were trying to figure out cost-wise, how can we afford to get the most stuff? So I went with the 23-quart Presto. It comes with, this one has the dial gauge on it. Some of them just have a weight, and I accidentally left the weight at home, so. But it has a weight on it. I will say if you buy the one that has the dial gauge on it, you need to get it tested. There is the Nebraska Extension Office. It's over off Center Street, and you can take it in and they will test it, and it takes like 2 minutes. It's super fast, but you want to make sure that your gauge is accurate because the gauge tells the pressure that's in the canner or the weight. And it depends on where you live on elevation. So here in Nebraska, our elevation is a little over 1,000 feet. So we have to use that as our pressure when we can. When you look at recipes, when you look at stuff, it'll ask it'll show a chart for your elevation. So we're a little bit over 1,000 feet elevation here. So when I have to take that into consideration. So you get your canner. The other thing you need to look at is your stove, okay? If you have a gas stove, congratulations, those seem to work a little bit better. If you have the old coil stoves, which I would love to go back to, those seem to work a little bit better. If you have a flat top glass stove, you do need to check your owner's manual, which, let's be honest, who keeps those? I sure as heck don't. So I went online and I Googled my owner's manual to be able to look up because you want to make sure that you are allowed to can on it. And then with that, you need to be able to know if you have the glass flat top, you need to have a canner that has the flat bottom. Some of the canners are made for the coils or the gas ones, and they have a little bit of they're not completely flat on the bottom. You want it to be able to rest completely on there. So you need to know your equipment, okay? You can Google, if you open up your oven, normally on the side, somewhere in there it has a little serial number, and you can Google that, and you can pull up your owner's manual that way, and there's a section in all the owner's manuals that'll talk about whether you can on that model. So, so we have the canner. I know that I can use it on my stove. The other thing is you want to get your supplies. So you want your jars. Now there are lots of jars. Some brands are better than others. Some brands are. There's a brand, I think it's called Pure, P-U-R. It is thinner glass, and it is not one that has had a super great success canning with. Canning, I like the ball jars just because the older ball jars, the vintage ones are the best, but those are hard to find and really expensive. But ball jars and ball lids, there's a couple different lid companies. Again, the brand of lids do matter too because some of them are a little more successful. There's a couple brands. I'll make sure that they're in the link. The ball jars, which you obviously can get at this most stores. There's also a company called 4 Jars, and I've been seeing a really, really great reviews from a lot of the canners that I follow that have had a really good seal success rate with the 4 Jars. You can go to 4jars.com, I think, and their lids have been really good. And then your other equipment, they sell these, like you can buy a pack of them or just individually. A funnel, a jar grabber. Unless you like to have your flesh burned off, I would not suggest sticking your hand into a hot canner. This just picks up the jar grabber. I'm sure that's the technical term, jar grabber. This is called a debubbler. And it also measures headspace on there. This is a debubbler. And then I didn't bring, but you also need white vinegar. Now, there are 2 different types of canning. You have water bath canning and you have pressure canning. So you need to be able to know which one. Now, water bath canning, you can do it in your pressure canner. You need a big, tall pot because whatever you put in there, it needs to have at least 2 inches of water over the jar. So you can use it, but you need to have a trivet or something at the bottom to keep the jars from being on the bottom. When you get a pressure canner, it comes with, and when you buy, there's some water bath canners that have it too, but it has a little plate in there that keeps the jars from being on the bottom so they don't like rattle around on it and break. And if you're going to stack your jars, if you're doing multiple where you have them stacked, then you also would have those in between, but you can buy those separately as well. But so there's water bath canning and then there's pressure canning. So water bath canning is things that go with the high acid foods. Tomatoes, like salsas and spaghetti sauce, the tomato products, and fruits. So your jams, your jellies, those high acid foods can be water bathed. Now, other countries do things differently. So these things are, what I'm saying is what has been FDA, USDA, whatever approved here in the United States. Other countries will do water bath canning for like 3 hours for pretty much everything, but it is not considered safe here. What you do in your kitchen is kind of up to you on that. But the water bath canning is for the high acid foods. So that means everything else, our vegetables and our meats and all of that stuff needs to be pressure canned because it has to get to a certain temperature and pressure for an extended period of time to make it safe because nobody wants botulism, right? And a lot of people get very concerned about home canned foods because of that, but the number of cases of that each year are really, really, really small. Does not normally happen. And so the biggest thing is making sure that we do things properly. So if you're going to water bath something, jelly, I don't know why jam and jelly was like the scariest thing. I think that's something that most people start with canning, and I was scared of it. Again, you just have to do some of these things. Scared or not, you need to just do it. But there was a fruit truck that came through Nebraska that had strawberries, and I ordered like 40 pounds of strawberries, and I was like, we're canning some jam. And we did, and it turned out fantastic, and it even set, and I was so excited. We have also been doing dandelion jelly. Did you know dandelions are phenomenal? They are not a weed. Well, they are considered a weed now, but they were an amazing food source. Their greens have so many vitamins and minerals, very high vitamin C, and the yellows have so many properties. You can make dandelion jelly, and we did. My jelly only kind of set. But some of this stuff this is our chance to try things new, right? We might fail, but we tried and we learn from that failure. My jelly may not set, but now it's kind of like dandelion honey and it's runny and it tastes delicious still. And it'll be fantastic on some homemade bread. So, and when I can't go to the store and get it, my kids are going to be happy with something. So if you are water bathing, there are recipes. You need to follow a recipe. And again, our recipe books. I have bought many canning books. This is a really great one, the ball canning book. It tells you how to can, tells you what to do with it. Phenomenal resource. Having books in case I can't go online. I will say there are so many on Facebook. I am a part of 8 different canning groups, from rebel canners who do things however they want to can, to strict by the book or only canning what the USDA approves. There are so many resources. So while we have access to this is a really great time to join those groups and to learn from people who have way more wisdom and knowledge than I do, who have been doing this for generations. There's also there's a video, and I'll make sure we have the link in there. There's a lady called Sutton Daze, SUTTONDAZE. If you look her up on YouTube, Sutton Daze, she has been my go-to because she is super easy to understand, and she has canning 101 videos. From the second you pull, I think she has this canner. She has a handful of canners, but I think she has this one on the video. But from the second you unbox it, how to do it from the very beginning. And I watched those videos of the intro probably 4 or 5 times before I got the courage up to really do it. I had a canner, a little bit different one, when we lived out in Virginia, and I made salsa and spaghetti sauce, and I'm really glad we didn't die because I did it wrong. I know that now. I did not do it correctly in any capacity, but I know that, and so now I know what to do and not to do. But I wish I had watched her videos, because her videos are really, really clear, and you can literally watch it and pause and do the stuff step by step with her. So that is like my go-to person I look for recipes with, and she does follow safe approved recipes, so she's not a rebel canner, and but she will step by step walk you through the safety and why those things are necessary to be safe. But when you're water bath canning, you're doing your high acid foods, if you are putting hot things into your jars, the jars have to be hot. Has anybody ever put something hot into a cold jar? Or reverse that, put something like your hot jar into a cold thing? It's not good, it breaks. I knew this, and I did not warm up my jar enough, and I poured my hot water in it, and it shattered. So when we are putting hot things, we have to have hot jars. Some people you will see, they will put their jars in the oven to warm them. There is definitely discrepancies on that. The heat of the oven is very different. So what you can do is you're going to want a clean jar anyway, right? It's not, when you're putting it into the canner and all that, it'll sanitize that. So I don't have to worry about sanitizing my jar, but I clean my jars. Every jar that I use, I'm going to clean really good with especially my hot soapy water. And then once I've rinsed it, I just fill it with hot water, and I let it sit in that hot water while I'm prepping all my stuff, so my jars are hot, so that when my jar is ready for my hot items, so if I am doing jam, I would have my hot jam going into a hot jar, going into my hot water bath for my canner. But when you're water bathing, it has to go over it by 2 inches, and then you would go by your time. So for Nebraska, again, we're at over 1,000 elevation. So when you are doing it also too, if you have really hard water, I have super hard water at my house. You can tell by the top of my jar or my canner. This is scrubbed. This is just stained from my darn hard water. Hard water will leave a film on everything, right? So it'll leave a film on all of my jars. My jars are fine. They're totally fine. They just look yucky. So what I do is I put a splash of vinegar in my canner, and it'll keep my jars from getting all filmy. I do that for my water bath and my pressure canner. So when you are going to do low acid foods like your meats and your veggies, which honestly for me right now, my biggest thing that I want to focus on canning is meat, because again, we like meat. We eat a lot of protein. Protein's really important for us, and I need shelf-stable meat. Again, I have some meat in my freezer because we want to grill, but I want shelf-stable meat. And for a lot of people, meat is the scariest. I don't know why jelly was the scariest for me, but meat gets scary. And meat is actually so easy to can. Now, if you watch Sutton Days, she has one that is called Ugly Chicken. And there's a reason it's called Ugly Chicken, is because it's ugly. It doesn't look pretty. But when you buy a can at the store, do you see what's in it until you open it? No, there's a reason for that, because it would look like this. I know, I see that face. I know. It does not look good. It does not look good. It looks gross. And it's called Ugly Chicken for a reason. I get it. You can cook it before you put it in here, and it just makes it look prettier, but it does not. That's an extra step. I don't know about you guys, but I don't have time for extra steps unless it's a safety thing. I am busy. So I am all about being as efficient with my time as I can be. And so for me, ugly is fine. So canning meat is really, really easy. And if you watch Sutton Days, she will show you step by step. But for chicken, you cut up the chicken. Now this has I think this has dark meat and it's thighs and breast in this one. But I normally buy the big packages. I don't buy frozen to do this. I normally buy like the big packages at whatever store I'm at. And you just cut it into big chunks. And you're going to squish it down into the jar. You need it as compact as possible when you're canning meat. Okay? You don't, like when you're doing, it's called raw pack. When you're raw packing your meat, I'm not canning it ahead of time. I'm not cooking it ahead of time. I'm raw packing it. Whether I'm doing, and I have beef chunks. I've been buying the stew meat at Costco, the beef chunks. It's already cut up. Yay. Again, saving my time because it's a priority. But you're pushing and squishing it into the jar as full as possible. And you're going to fill it up. When you do meat, you go up to, each of these little rings is like, it's called your head space. And so you fill it up to 1 inch headspace. It'll tell you in the recipe that you're looking at or what you're canning, it'll tell you how much headspace you need. You need like 1/4 of an inch with your jellies and some of that stuff. And this little thing has like, it'll tell you your headspace on that too. I just look at the rings on the jar. It's this is the inch mark. And so when I'm doing raw packing, like chicken or my beef chunks or my pork, again, Costco, they're really thick pork chops, like they're like huge, right? I normally just get those and cut those up. And again, you're squishing them into the jar. You want them really, really compact. I saw a couple pictures the other day of people who have done it, and their jars were like half full when they got done. It's because they didn't squish them down. They didn't fill them all the way. You want your jar squishing everything down, filling it all the way. And then when you raw pack your meat, you don't add any other liquid. It has all of this juice. That sounds gross, but all of this liquid is from the meat itself as juice, which then I could use and make gravy or dump right into my soup, and it has all this flavoring in it too. You can add spices. You need to watch your recipe because some spices magnify as they're in the can or as they're cooking. And so I don't even add salt. I don't add anything to mine. I want to season mine when I get done. Some people, you can do whole meals in a jar. I did one that was a beef stew. You can do whole meals in the jar. I like to do individual ingredients, and then I can make it however I want. If I just did a bunch of taco meat and then we wanted to make Italian, I'm out of luck, right? So like I season it after it comes out, but there are recipes, but again, make sure you're following an approved recipe and you're following the spices that it tells you to, because some of them will get really strong. But when you're raw packing, you squish all of your meat into it, and then you have to make sure that the top of the jar is completely clean or the lids won't seal. So that's where your white vinegar comes in. So I take a paper towel and I just kind of like put a little bit of white vinegar on the top, and I run it over and clean the rim of the jar really, really good, and then I put my lid on. Now, I did not bring any jars with rings on it. When you're canning, you put your ring that it comes with on it, and you do it finger tight. You're not like cranking it all the way, and you don't want it to jiggle loose. You want it finger tight, and then you put it into your canner. The reason I don't have any on here now is because these have already been canned, and you don't store your product with the rings on there, because if the reason is what happens if this seal failed me? Sometimes if the rings are on it, it'll reseal, and then I wouldn't know. So if the rings are off of it, if something happened and for some reason my seal failed, I would know in storage. So once I open it, then I can put the ring on it, but I do not store mine with the rings on it, so I don't have one. But when you, and if I was smart, I would have just brought a whole empty jar, but not that smart. So once I've got my stuff, if I'm putting cold product into here, what temperature should this be? Cold, right? Like I'm going to have, and there's a line, and it tells you, each canner will tell you how much water you need to use it. If you are pressure canning, you're not filling it full of water. there's a couple quarts of water. I have a line on the inside of mine from using it that it's kind of a stained line. Just the water stains the metal. It's not like stain. Anyway, there's a line, and it'll tell you how much you need. It's about this much water in the bottom of it. And if I'm putting a cold meat into here, my canner starts cold because I don't want to shock my jars. I don't want to break my jars. Okay? So if I'm canning my chicken, I've got my jars, they're clean, they're scrubbed, they're cold jar, not in the refrigerator cold, they're just room temperature, okay? I've got my meat, I've squished it all down here, I've wiped my rim with my vinegar, I've got my lid and my seal on it, and I put them in there, and then I'm going to pressure can them and it cooks while it's canning, it's cooking it, but it's doing it for the time. So here in Nebraska, if I'm using my dial gauge, I go to 11 pounds of pressure, but if I'm using a weight, it's 15 pounds of pressure. So from step by step, let's go through real quick what it would look like to start my canning process. Okay, so let's say I did all my stuff, I got my chicken raw packed, it's in there. The first thing I'm going to do is seal it. And these have, so see this little thing here? This is the lock. On the inside, I don't know if you can see that. Do you see that little lip right there? That will lock when it gets to pressure. It will literally lock it in place, so you can't open this when it's full of pressure. That's how you get the whole like setting off a bomb in my kitchen type thing. You don't have to worry about it. It will lock. Okay, so it has this little locking feature on it. So when I've put my water, always make sure you have your water in here. You do not ever dry can this thing. You will ruin it. That will explode this and make it not work. So I have my water that it calls for in here, the 2 quarts. I have my jars in here. The Presto 23 quart will hold 7. Now this is a 1.5 pints, which these sizes are actually really hard to get. Normally it's the quarts. It'll hold 7 quarts, or it'll hold, I think like 14 or 16, maybe 16 pints. And if I'm going to stack them, if I'm doing the pints and I have double, I'm going to fill my bottom, and then I would put this and then do my other layer on top. I'm never stacking jar on top of jar in a canner. Whether it's water bath or whether it's a pressure canner, you can't stack jars on top of each other without something in there. Okay? So I've got my jars in here. I've got my water. I have my splash of vinegar because my hard water stinks. I've got this, and then I put it on and I seal it. It literally only goes on one way, which is kind of like a puzzle. I get it on, I seal it, and then I turn my stove on. Part of this is figuring out each stove is very, very different. You have to figure out your stove and how it likes to work. But I put it on, and then I turn it up to high or medium high, and I'm going to let it start coming to pressure. Okay? So it takes a while. Especially if my jar, if I have cold stuff and I'm starting with a cold canner, it takes a lot longer to get heated, right? Like that makes sense. So let's say I have my cold stuff in here. I've let it, and it's coming up to pressure. This little spout right here will start spraying like steam. Like when it gets to a steady steam, like stream of steam, that's a tongue twister. When it has a steady stream of steam, I'm going to start a timer for 10 minutes. And I'm going to let it, it's called venting. I'm letting it vent for 10 minutes. And during that time, this little thing in the back will pop up as the pressure builds. And when my steam has been going for 10 minutes and this is up, then it has the little weight, whether I'm using the weight instead of this, or if I'm just using the cap, I would put this on here and then I would watch this because the dial will start showing that your pressure is going. And if you don't have a dial, you can do it's called a jiggler, and it'll dance on the top of it, and you'll know when it gets to pressure because it's dancing. And again, you can watch Sutton Days, and she'll show you both. She'll show you the jiggler and the dial gauge. And it will, once it gets to 11 pounds of pressure, because we're here in Nebraska at 1,000 feet, a little over, when it gets to that, then I start my timer. And you cook it for the amount of time. Again, I get a cookbook that tells you how long, because things go for different times. Carrots and potatoes go for different times than meats and beans. And even carrots and potatoes are different. So like the quart size for meat and beans is 90 minutes, and the pints are 75 minutes at that pressure. If at any point in time my pressure drops below what I have to have, so for here, 11 is my range on my my dial gauge. If it drops below 11 at any time, I have to start my timer over again. So if I have been going the whole time and I get down to 5 minutes, and I'm like, getting close to the end, and I've dropped down, I get to restart my timer. It has to be at a certain pressure for the time to make it safe. That's the time that guarantees that it's safe. So let's say and so sometimes I have to babysit it. Like I have to stay in the kitchen. I'll bring a book. I'll do a bunch of other stuff while I'm doing it, but I keep an eye on that. Now it can go above. I don't let it go above 15 because you don't want too much pressure, because again, you don't want it. This has a little black circle on there. That will pop if the pressure gets too extreme so it doesn't explode. It will literally pop that off and vent itself. But again, that would be starting all over. But so I keep it normally between 11 and 13 or 14, just kind of where it goes. And so sometimes I'm adjusting my stove a lot. Some days I feel like it holds pressure awesome, and I put it on and it stays there the whole time. And sometimes I feel like I'm constantly moving it around a little to keep it where it needs to be safe. But let's say I've done all of this. I stayed at my pressure that I needed to. We are good, and my timer goes off. I love it when that happens. Then what I get to do is I just get to turn my stove off. But I don't touch this at all. I walk away. I go do something else until the dial goes all the way down to 0, and my little popper in the back, my little pressure gauge, is down. When that is all the way down and my dial is at 0, has to be both things, then I know that it's safe to take the lid off. But that cool down, or that time too, is also configured into the safety of the food, the cooking time. So, or the pressure time. So it all goes with it. You can't just be like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to do all that. So let's say I've done everything I'm supposed to do. My dial says 0. My little pressure gauge is down in the back. Then I'm going to pull my stopper that I have on here that I did not bring. The little stopper, I'm going to pull that off, and I'm going to set my timer again for 10 minutes. And I'm going to give it 10 minutes to just hang out, just sit. And any additional steam or any of it is also starting to let this come to a different temperature. When that timer goes off again, then I get to carefully take the lid off. It has steam in here, so never open your canner like this. You always open it away from you. Unless you really like multiple degree burns, don't do that. So open your canner away from you, your lid, and then you set your timer again for 10 minutes. You're going to love your timer. And again, when we're talking about power outages, my son actually had the idea of, Mom, don't we need one of those turn timers? Yes, we do. Yes, we got one. So again, 10 minutes with the lid off now, I'm going to let it sit. Because those jars in there are really hot. And the air outside, even without air conditioning, is not going to be that hot. And so you don't want to, again, freak out your jars. You can have siphoning. Siphoning means the liquid leaves the jar, and it can cause your jars to break. So we let it sit in there for another 10 minutes. And then after all of that, it is safe to grab your little handy-dandy tool and pull them out. You're going to put them on a counter with a towel under it because they're hot, and you're going to leave them for 24 hours, up to 24 hours. I normally do 12 to 24. You're going to leave them. You're not going to touch them. You're not going to check them. You're not going to wish them luck. You're going to leave them alone. And after that time, the jars have cooled down. They've become completely cool. At that point, you're going to check your jar. You want to see if they sealed. So if they didn't, you're going to test it. You can go like this in the middle of the jar. There, it will pop. If it's not sealed, you'll hear it. It'll like click. It's like the little metal on it. You'll be able to hear it. When you take them out of the can, you'll start hearing the ping. We call that the sound of music in our house. You can hear them ping, 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 and that's how they're sealing. You know, like I love that sound because I know they're all sealing and they're doing good. And so then after I've checked them, okay, well that one sounds good because it's not loose in the middle. And then I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to hold it. And then I take the ring off of it, and then I'm going to hold it by the lid. Should be able to support its weight. I always hold my hand under it in case somehow I didn't do that. And when all of that is done, I'm going to wash my jar. I'm going to wash it. The reason is sometimes you get a little bit of siphoning. That means some of the liquid somehow seeped out. The jar or the canner sometimes can have a little bit of fat in it especially if I'm doing meat. I need to wash my jars because I want to know when I put it on my shelf, it's clean. If I go to grab a jar and it feels greasy, that means my seal probably didn't seal very well. And somehow it came open at some point in time. My jar is greasy. I don't want that. So I know that before I put it into storage, everything is clean and not sticky and not greasy at all. And then I date and label it. That way, again, I'm rotating my stock. If I do my chicken, I'm using first in, first out. I'm not just stacking all the new on top of the old. I'm stacking it up. And then I have it date and labeled. So the lids, they say you cannot reuse them. You used to be able to reuse ball jar lids a whole lot better because they were thicker. They are way thinner now than they used to be. They're cutting some big time corners. But literally, there are so many things that you can do. I did meatballs. There's soup. There's veggies. For me, we're gardening this year. I want to be able to preserve it. There's some things I cannot can squash. And there are some things I have to blanch, like potatoes and some things before I can can them. But we're buying books on how to can our stuff from our garden. We are about preserving. You know, you can go buy this stuff on the shelf. Absolutely. Go get started there. We're buying a bunch of canned stuff until our garden takes off, that we have other options. But I want to know that if I can't get it in the store, I have an option of growing it and preserving it at home. And so for us, that is why we are doing a lot of canning. And I know that it can seem overwhelming at first, but part of this is just doing it, just starting it. Once you do it once, it is not as scary. That first time, it's the fear of it. And I understand that, but you just getting started. Watch the videos. Watch the video enough times until you're confident to do something about it. Don't just watch the videos and never actually do the item. Do the thing. Even if you have to do it scared, even if you're shaking the whole time, do it. Start with something small. Start with something that I started with carrots because I'm like, carrots are cheap, and if I mess it up, I don't feel like I wasted a whole lot. I did not start with chicken first or meat. I started with carrots, and when I did, I was like, oh my gosh, I canned carrots, yay! My husband came home, and I was like, look what I made today. Like, I was so proud of myself. Carrots were super easy. Well, carrots, literally, you peel them, you wash them, you peel them, you chop them up, and you stick them in a jar, and you pour some hot water on them, and that was it. That was all I had to do. It was super easy. And so start with something small. Get a book, join some Facebook groups, watch the Sutton Days. There's tons of canning videos. I like her because she's so easy to understand step by step, and she has safe recipes. But just get started. And part of this is while there's supplies in the store. Jars go through cycles of being really hard to find. Prices are what? They are out there now. And some of the prices are going up on some of them. Sometimes at price match. If they're cheaper online at Walmart, they will honor that price in store. Sometimes Target actually has had some cheaper jars. Never buy jars at Hy-Vee or Kroger. They're way marked up in those stores. But Menards has jars. So some of this is having the jars now, because if you don't have them, you're not going to be able to use them. But also don't buy them and have cases and cases of jars that you're not using. Use them. Do the canning and put the food in. Now, I have extra cases of jars because I'm expecting our garden to have enough this year or next year to be able to do it. But I'm also putting stuff in there while I do it. Okay. Another thing when it comes to storage, you can't store jars on top of each other. Another part of that is you don't want the seal to break and then it's been resealed. Also, they will fall over, and you don't want to break jars. You can store them. I save, which I brought, like this. This actually had the half-gallon mason jars, but save the boxes that the jars come in because you can store them back in that, and that's a great thing. And I do stack too high on those, but it has the cardboard between them. But look up some recipes. Start doing some stuff now. Think about how you can diversify your pantries. And I know that canning seems very, very scary, but follow the recipes, follow the videos, start with that, and start getting confidence now so you know that you can do it. We have time for a couple questions maybe. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah. No. So Instapot is a pressure cooker. Can you use an Instapot to pressure can? No. An Instapot is a pressure cooker, but you cannot can in it. There is a digital electric canner that you can use. It does not hold very many jars at a time, but it does. You can do that. But again, it is electric. So for me, I'm trying now. I have never canned over an open fire. I don't really want to, but if everything hits the fan and we do not have electricity and I needed to, you can over an open fire. You also can use like the camping propane stoves. Some people will can outside, and they will use the single propane burner stoves and can outside. But yeah, would you?
Two questions. First, with the egg thing, do you like the metal lids or the plastic lids? Does it matter?
Doesn't matter. She asked, with the water glassing eggs, does it matter if you have a plastic or a metal lid? And it doesn't. You just want to seal it.
So you have a rocker that you put on there, whether it's 10 or 15.
Yes.
So if you put it on the 15, does the pressure have to get up to 15? Because you said you keep it at 11.
So if you are using the weight with the jiggler on it, you ignore this. You either use the gauge or you use the jiggler, because it does do it a little bit differently. So if I'm using the jiggler, where we're at, we would use a 15, and I would do that, but I wouldn't do the gauge then. There's not an 11 for a jiggler. It's either 10 or 15. So you would use the 15. But if you're using the gauge, you can use the 11. I don't know why that is. It just is. Like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to me, but
If you're using 10 pounds, then you would still...
because 10 pounds isn't, you either have 10 or 15, but 10 pounds isn't enough. So you would have to use the 15.
But then you're still going at 11.
But there is no 11. If you're using
The gauge, if you're watching the gauge.
but you don't have a jiggler if you're using the gauge. It has a little cap, but it's not a weight. It's not a jiggler. So it has a little cap thing on there, but it's not a jiggler. It's not the weight. So if I'm using the gauge, then I'm using the just the gauge and just like the little cap that seals this off, and that's the 11. But if I'm using the jiggler, then it's the 15, but there is no gauge for it. Does that make sense?
Not really, because I have the 10 or the 15,
Uh-huh.
you stick it on, and it jiggles.
Mm-hmm. You have an All-American though, don't
I
you?
do, and I'm still watching the gauge. So, but I'm not, I was staying at like between 10 and 11.
So with the All-American, I'm not sure on that. Since I don't have the All-American, but what I've been told with the Prestos is that you either use a jiggler or you use the gauge. Like that you're not doing both of them, because there is a little bit of a discrepancy on that, because the jiggler doesn't do 11. It either does 10 or 15, and since we have to do 11, like you're not getting the full jiggle on one of it. It wouldn't jiggle enough for a 10 from where I need it to be, and a 15 is going to be higher, so I wouldn't need the gauge on that. So double check with the All-American whether if you're using the jiggler, if you should be watching the jiggler or the gauge on that. So, any other questions? Okay.
Megan, you said you held it by
Yeah.
are you saying by the glass or by the lid?
By the lid. So so after it's done, it's cool all the way. I've checked it because I want to check it to have a little bit of an idea. I've checked it, it's sealed. I take the ring off of it, and then I'm going to hold it by the lid. I'm holding it by the lid because I want it to support its weight. If it can't, that's how you know that it's not sealed. If you get something that is not sealed, it goes into your fridge. Now you have dinner that week, whether you meant to or not. That it goes into the fridge. And some people have had, some even with the ball lids, have had a rate of failure. I mean, they're not 100% all the time, so you have to check them. Also, when you do it, you're checking your lid. I have noticed that lately when I've been buying fresh out of the case lids, they're warped or they're dented. I cannot use a dented lid. Now, I have done a few where I opened them and reused the lid just to see what would happen with the intention, if they don't seal, I'm going to use that product. And if they're, like when you open it, they're really hard. There's a lady I follow who just opens them like this. I can't, I don't know how she does it. I'm like, it makes me want to cry. But, so I use I'll use a spoon and just carefully, and you'll know too when it seals, it should make the little as a noise. It's yeah, it makes a little bit of a noise with that. And, anyway, so I've had a couple. Now I save my lids and then I use them for my dehydrated products. I don't want to waste canning lid for that. I just use them for my dehydrating products, and then they're totally fine. But again, I've written on the top. Now, I didn't write that these are potatoes because this is the only thing I'm canning right now that looks like this, right? When I did start doing pork, I did have to change and make sure I put chicken or pork or turkey, they all look the same. So I did mark that on the top of it. But I also know what I have a used lid because it has markings on it. And then that way I'll know if it was used or not. There is a lady who I follow who does, she's the one who pops them with her nails. But she does save her lids because they're not damaged. And then there's a way that you can, she does it, boils them in a little bit of baking soda water and reuses them. But the lids are not made like they used to intentionally, so you do not reuse them. They want to make money.
Potatoes and sweet potatoes, is it sweet with water in it? Does it lose the integrity of the potatoes?
So the sweet potatoes get a little bit softer. The potatoes don't, so you have to blanch them. Okay, so the question was with the potatoes and sweet potatoes, do they lose, because you put water in them, do they lose the integrity of the product? They don't. Like potatoes, you blanch in boiling water. I think it's 10 minutes. I don't always go the full 10 minutes of that, but when you're some of the things like carrots, I don't blanch because they already get so soft. Like canned carrots. If you buy carrots from the store, they're soft, right? They're not crunchy. They're really soft carrots. So sweet potatoes get a little softer, but potatoes really do fine with that. And it'll tell you whether you hot pack it or cold pack it. When it talks about hot packing, is I have a pot of clean boiling water, not the water that's in my canner. I have a pot of clean boiling water that then I top over my products. So like if I'm doing potatoes, if I washed them, peeled them, cut them, soaked them in some cold water to get some of the starch out, blanch them, rinse them, and then they're hot. I put them in here. I'm putting hot water in here. It'll tell you to hot pack. You're using hot, clean water. And whenever you do you're adding liquid to anything, whether it be soup, whether it be meatballs, veggies, whatever you're adding, when you're adding liquid to it, it's called debubbling it. You can really use like a spatula or something, but you put it in here and you kind of go all the way around because you don't want air bubbles at the bottom. And as you go around the product, you'll see all these little bubbles, like all of them coming up. So you're going all the way around the product, and in the middle, you want to get any of the air bubbles out. One, it would can hold bacteria, can hold some of that stuff, and it'll affect the cooking. And then you also get seal failure. But it'll tell you when you look at the recipe, it'll tell you your headspace on all of it. And you need the liquid has to be at least half the jar. I have a couple jars of potatoes. This one looked the best. The starch is a little bit at the bottom. I had a couple that the water line was a little bit lower. It's called siphoning. Potatoes and beans absorb water. And so I put a little too much potato in there, and I should have had a little extra space so that the water wasn't absorbed as much. But as long as you have at least a half a thing of water covering it, you're okay on that. But it'll tell you on your recipe your headspace. It'll tell you whether you're hot packing or cold packing it. It'll tell you on that. Like if anybody wants to look through this jar, you can, and it'll tell you like in the back it has like your produce guide. It has like step by step, like here's your headspace, here's how to debubble, here's how to seal your lid, here's how to pull it out with the grabby thing. I don't know. It has a technical term, I'm sure. It'll tell you how to test your lids. I mean, all of these are in here as well, and so being able to have the book, the physical book, for when I forget and I have to keep going back and looking. But again, with the resources that we have, use them as we have them. Use the online resources. Get the physical books now so that you have them, and just get started. Just start somewhere. Have a canning party. Get a friend to come over and do it with you. Like, you don't have to do it by yourself if you're scared. Just start somewhere. Start with something easy, but just get started. And then you have more things to put on your shelf that is shelf stable, that you know what's in it, that you could make again if you needed to. You have a resource. So I'm going to stick around if anybody has any other questions about anything that we've talked about today. Prepping, eggs, all of it. I'll stick around until all the questions are done. And again, you can email me or Jan any questions that you have as well. And we'll make sure all the links for Sutton Days. I start with her like 101 canning. She literally has intro canning stuff. Start there, and then you can watch some of her other stuff and get ideas on that. And then if you're on Facebook, there's a ton of canning things. We'll put some links in there. There's Canning and Preserving with Love, canning for safety for beginners. There's lots of things, and you can always ask questions. Use the little search feature before you ask a question, because a lot of them have been asked many times. But you can always go online and look at those too, because there are so much resources out there. So, all right, let's pray real quick, and then we'll be done. God, thank you for today. God, thank you for the amazing sunshine. God, thank you for this opportunity that we have to learn. God, help us to be people who are proactive. Help us to be people who take the things that we're seeing and choose to not be fearful, but choose to be proactive. God, help us to be wise with the resources that you've given us now. God, I pray that we will look for the ways that you're moving in the world and join in on that. I pray that you will help us to not be afraid. Help us to trust you in what's coming, because we know that you're coming back. Thank you for the ways that you love us and you provide for us. In your name I pray. Amen. All right.